What is it that your system, Conrad Golf Ranking, what is it that you answer better than any of the other ranking systems, in your opinion?
Well, I think every ranking system has strengths and it has weaknesses. I personally prefer points-based systems to a strokes gained or a head-to-head system like the Tuga system is. I just think points-based systems align more naturally with how golf is valued outside of the ranking numbers. If you look at prize money, there's a big dispersion between first place and second place, even if it's a loss in a playoff. Whereas strokes gain systems, that the two guys in the playoff, they virtually have the same ranking gain for that week, and golf doesn't work like that as far as how it's remunerated. So I tend to think that the points-based is a good way to do it. It's tricky trying to get the field values in comparative and accurate throughout a whole global system with very, very differing strengths and values of fields and tours. And even in a points-based system, it's very, very hard to have a system that takes everything that you need to into consideration, like the difficulty during the week, just how tough the course was set up compared to its actual rating and things like that. In a perfect system, you'd have the provision to make all those adjustments as well.
All right, there we are. As always, the ticker is counting, so that's a good thing. I'm live here with John Conrad, who is probably better known across social media as Conrad Golf Rankings. So, John, thank you for coming on from basically halfway around the world. This is a pretty cool thing that technology allows us to do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, I'm sure everybody's going to pick up on your accent. So, John is in Australia. I think Brisbane is where you
Brisbane, Australia. Yeah.
Yep, and I'm here in Hilton Head, South Carolina. So we're about as far apart on the planet maybe as you can be before you start getting closer to one another. But like we were talking in the pre-show, I've followed you for some time, and I have a lot of respect for the content that you put out there. Outside of your ranking system, I find the ranking system very, very interesting. In particular, as the official World Golf Rankings have gotten a lot of pushback, and lately with the onset or the development of LIV and people playing on different places around the world. But your system seems to have a less of a bias to it. And I'd like to I guess we could jump in right there, since that's kind of where the discussion is leading right now. And a lot of things to talk about, of course, LIV, the PGA Tour dynamic, and the big news that everyone's talking about the last 2 days is the Brooks Koepka.
Yeah, that's got tongues wagging.
Yes, tongues wagging. A lot of opinions on that. But I'd like to start out just by, if they have followed you, but they haven't followed you closely enough to understand that your system, or if they may not have been introduced to you yet, I'd like you to go ahead and tell everybody what Conrad Golf Ranking is and how it differs from the norm.
Sure. Well, to start, around 2022, when LIV was about to get off the ground, it was clear that LIV weren't going to get OWGR points for at least some period of time, if at all. I was just interested I wonder what their rankings would be if they were getting points. So under the old OWGR system, I just started putting those adjustments into a spreadsheet to see where they would be. When the new OWGR system was introduced in August 22, the more I looked into it, the more I read about it, it seemed to just be very major tour based. It really devalued all the lesser tours to the point I couldn't see any real benefit other than some pathways that already existed or would exist anyway for those lesser and developing tours to even bother being a part of it. For example, when you've got, people winning events, even on smaller tours with 120 players in the field and getting, 0.25 of an OWGR point for a win, I just thought that was a bit ridiculous. So I started making adjustments to what I was doing to improve the system for those players. And by the end of 2022, I think there was the DP World Tour Championship at the same time as the RSM event on the PGA Tour. John Rahm came out outspoken about how laughable the new system was with the points allocation. Tiger Woods commented that it was obviously flawed and needed to be reviewed. Nothing's really happened. There's been some minor adjustments made, but that flaw or laughable status is still existing, and that's not relating to LIV. That's outside of the LIV issue. So in 2023, I made my own system up based more loosely on the previous OWGR system and a little bit from the Rolex women's rankings, and using a strength of field that gets applied consistently to all events off all OWGR ranked tours, plus LIV, plus senior majors get points in my system. The only event on those tours that don't are events with less than 30 players. So, for example, the Hero World Challenge with its 20-player
Mhm.
field gets no points in my system.
Very interesting. What was basis did you use to create the foundation that you just described? Was there something that you saw as a flaw in the OWGR system that you said, I'm going to develop a structure that's going to be more conducive to legitimate ranking?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I noticed was that um, when the OWGR system has both a minimum and a maximum divisor, it's almost double dipping for players who have access to lots of events and can play more than the minimum 40 number. My minimum is 35, the same as the Rolex series rankings, world women's rankings. So I just felt that 40 was a little bit too high. There's a number of tours that don't have 20 events a year. And then I thought that the maximum divisor, while you're not dividing the total points by that divisor, you're dividing the points from those most recent events in the 2-year period, but you still get a benefit of the age depreciation not hitting you as hard. And I just thought that was a bit of a double dip advantage for the players on the tours with more events or access to multiple tours where they could play lots of events. On my system, minimum divisor is 35, and if you play a lot of events like Casey Jarvis, you get your points divided by the 71 events you've played on.
Do you think that the changes that you saw in the OWGR system, that they coincided with when all of this shift in the golfing world started to happen a number of years ago, where it all seemed to be congregated, that the PGA Tour took more of a on-hands approach as far as world golf was considered? Did you see it? Was there a parallel universe, so to speak,
Well,
that these things
I
started to change?
yeah, it's a good point. I think there certainly is a timeline that runs close. Whether it's cause and effect or just coincidence, I'm not sure. I mean, the old OWR system certainly had some flaws. Personally, I think it didn't get the minimum and maximums for each tour that it used to operate on reviewed often enough and regularly enough to be relevant for the fields they were getting. There was a flagship event on every tour that was worth double the maximum points, and I can remember an Australian PGA Championship out here in early 2022, and Jediah Morgan won it and got like 32 OWGR points for winning an event that had, I think Minwoo Lee was ranked 49 in the field, and there was no other player in the field ranked under 350. Sorry, there was a couple in the 340s. Like one player ranked better than 340 and he got 32 points. So that was a bit nuts. But I don't know that the whole system needed to be throwing out for the shots gained system that was introduced. And I do think that the timing of introducing a system so close after a global pandemic, which really did impact much of the world far more than, say, the United States tour, I think that led to some of the extra weighting or bias that many believe that the new OWGR system has.
Do do you think that the way that it's set up favors the which would somewhat make sense? If you have superstars, you got to keep them in front of the camera as much as you can. Of course, golf is a meritocracy, and you earn it. But and I understand it. From a business standpoint, you have to keep the big faces in front. That's what the fans want to see. Do you think that the current system has any bias towards giving those players advantages that where it's not an equal playing field?
Well, I think that the current system, in my opinion, overvalues some of the middle tier players, particularly in the American tours.
Mhm.
I mean, there's an argument: do a lot of little ducks make a field stronger, or is it the big ducks in the field that makes an event harder to win? And I kind of align myself to the bigger and the more big ducks. That's where your strength of field really lies, as opposed to lots of little ducks. And I think the new system very much places a lot of strength in the little ducks.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's an ever changing dynamic. If I'm not mistaken, it was Mark McCormick going way back to the was it 60s or 70s that came up with the official world golf ranking. Or I don't know if it was if that was the name of it back then, but I think they were the first ones to come up with it.
Yeah, it was I think it was the IMG rankings, and it came out
Yes.
like in December every year, like an annual ranking of that year. Yeah.
I just not long ago I finished the book Rainmaker about Hughes Norton. I don't know if you had a chance to read that yet or
I haven't
heard of
read
it,
all of
but
it. I've read some of it, haven't got all the way through.
it's very interesting, isn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah, it's cool. I've been trying to find people who might know him to reach out to invite him on the show. I saw online he was on a podcast or two. Maybe he knew the people because it's
Okay.
next to impossible to find his contact information. I'll be at the US PGA show here next week, and I'm going to try down there. Somebody's got to know him down there. But one of the interesting things, and not to get too far off topic, but that I found from him is he was fired by like 4 or 5 people who were number one in the world, which is kind of odd. He helped get somebody there and do all that work and make them that money, and then they say, "Oh, we don't need you anymore."
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough world to be in. I think no matter which part of the world you're in.
What is it that your system, Conrad Golf Ranking, what is it that you answer better than any of the other ranking systems, in your opinion?
Well, I think every ranking system has strengths and it has weaknesses. I personally prefer points-based systems to a strokes gained or a head-to-head system like the Tugger system is. I just think points-based systems align more naturally with how golf is valued outside of the ranking numbers. If you look at prize money, there's a big dispersion between first place and second place, even if it's a loss in a playoff. Whereas strokes gained systems, that the two guys in the playoff, they virtually have the same ranking gain for that week, and golf doesn't work like that as far as how it's remunerated. So I tend to think that the points based is a good way to do it. It's tricky trying to get the field values in comparative and accurate throughout a whole global system with very, very differing strengths and values of fields and tours. And even in a points-based system, it's very, very hard to have a system that takes everything that you need to into consideration, like the difficulty during the week, just how tough the course was set up compared to its actual rating and things like that. In a perfect system, you'd have the provision to make all those adjustments as well. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, I can imagine at Royal Melbourne when they play down there and the winds really kick up, especially at that time of year. If they get those greens too fast and they get a little dry and baked out, and you're putting it off the green from 20 feet away, that the course condition would have to play some type of factor in the amount of points given or the rankings given for that particular event.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that we've had times here down in the Sandbelt where our major tournaments we've had players walk off because an assistant greenkeeper has cut a hole just too close to a slope on a quick green and windy days, and you couldn't, the ball didn't stop, you couldn't mark it, and the only way you could hole it was hitting it 3 foot above the hole and have it come in the back door. So we've had all sorts. So they have to be very careful with that because of the firmness of those greens with slopes.
When you're looking at it, when you developed your system, how did you consider the strength of field and why that might matter more so than let's say the amount of wins or win in that event?
Well, I
Or
guess
how do you give it a
yeah,
weight? How do you weight one more than the other?
sure. I guess I look at it because I'm a believer in the big ducks theory. I look at effectively how strong are the top 40 players in any field, because effectively to be successful in the event, you're going to have to beat them. Some of the other players will beat themselves, and some of those 40 on any given week can have a bad week and beat themselves as well. But you're going to have to beat the top 40 to win. So I look at that strength, and that becomes like a cap for how far or how high the points value can go. Then the balance of the field adds, a cumulative strength, and either keeps it as close to that cap as possible, or if it's not a particularly deep field, and live fields are in this category, the field strength drops away from that cap quite quickly.
How should I ask this question? Should someone that wins, let's say that they struggling, they've been on the tour and for a number of years, and they keep their card, they lose their card, a journeyman, or or a journey lady. They can have one great week and that can catapult them up. Is that something that you think should be modified? Is it something that is correct? How, because you see this sometimes where somebody might over here, they might, well, it doesn't happen where someone Mondays an event and wins, but they're, they get into the field because maybe somebody dropped out and they're low in the ranking, but they're somehow their status got them high enough, and then they get in it, and then they win. You know, they put it together. They are there are many. Let me first preface that with there's many reasons why great players might not win. Maybe they're not accustomed to travel. Maybe their home life, something their kid is sick, and they're dealing with that. So there's a lot of different reasons. I'm not saying all these players aren't great, but what my question is: should one great week, either a year or every other year, warrant somebody moving up exponentially in a ranking system? Especially when it comes down to invites to bigger tournaments and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think if you can have your strength of field, relatively accurate comparative across all the tours, journeyman, journey lady, or anyone else, a qualifier coming through and having a great week and getting the job done, they deserve whatever lift their ranking points in that event gives them. They won't stay there forever unless they can continue to follow up that with good form. But it does need to be said that in a points-based system, their slide, if their form isn't maintained, will be a little slower than it would be, say, in a strokes gain system. Because you
Is it
you miss a cut, you get no points, but you don't have to pay, pay your.
is it better? And I'm sure some of the people sitting at home listening or in their car or in the gym or wherever they are. Is it better to play consistently well? Let's say you're finishing 15th to 50th every single time you tee it up, or is it better to win every other year, and let's say you miss 50% or slightly more of the cuts of the event you're playing? Which one of those dynamics is better for the ranking and then better for the, let's say, the game in general?
I guess it depends on which ranking system you want to look at. I mean, a strokes gain like data golf would probably suggest that the consistent player is going to be more highly ranked on their system. In a points-based system, it might actually work the other way, where your big win can cover a heap of missed cuts where you don't, as and I personally think that aligns with how golfers are remunerated. You miss a cut, you might not get paid, but you're not paying back some of your winnings from last week when you won. So I don't mind. I don't mind that. I think if you get the points value right, it can be interesting to see how closely some of the players ranked on shots gained and points based systems can be.
Yeah, when I think of somebody who won periodically, but would have a fair amount of missed cuts, John Daly comes to mind for me, for my
Mm.
area.
Yes, yeah,
I grew up '90s, 2000s, and obviously he had his success at the PGA Championship here in Indiana, and then of course at the British Open. But he had a well, there's no secret about it. He had his trials and tribulations throughout his career with many different things, but he also had a lot of missed cuts, and obviously a phenomenal talent. Nobody would ever deny him that. But I always wondered that as you saw someone like him, and then you had somebody. I mean, I'll go back even further. Somebody like a Tom Kite that was. It seemed like he, or let's say a Matt Kuchar for more recent times. Matt Kuchar would seem like he top 10 or 20 every single time he played, and I always myself would wonder. And we had these discussions playing, and we always have our opinion in our groups. Which one is better? Would you rather have a Kuchar career or would you rather have a daily career as far as your points and your rankings and all those other good things?
I think from a rankings point of view, um, I imagine that the the Matt Kuchar type player, even on my points based system, would be higher up than the John Daly type player. Certainly when it comes to the end of the careers, let's face it, at the highest level, I think one thing Brooks Koepka does get right is that only majors matter. And in his eyes, other tourers, no matter what tour he's on, they're reps for majors. That's how elite golfers are remembered. After majors, there's tour events, there's how long you were number one in the world, those types of things. But none of those other things override the number of majors you've got beside your name at the end of your career. So I think personally, I'd value Daly's career higher, but Kuchar would be higher up on the rankings because that consistency is worth something.
There's the points-based system, which I think yours is based off. What would you classify the official world golf ranking system as, and the difference between that and your system?
Well, the OWGR system is a points-based system. The difference between and mine is how it works out its field rating, or what I call my strength of field. And my strength of field goes solely off the rankings of players, and the higher the ranking, the more points they bring to a field. The OWGR system uses strokes gained and the strokes gained numbers for players to determine via some curve type matrix a player performance points number, and that's how they make their field ratings from the total of those player performance numbers in the field. My concern with strokes gained is, you say the John Daly type, there's lots of stuff going on in players' lives that we don't know about. And look at, Brooks Koepka in the last 12 months and the family stuff, which is very sad. And obviously, you'd have to be heartless for that not to impact you on a golf course as a husband and a dad. So not everybody in the field is at the same place. Not everybody in the field is at the same mindset. So strokes gained in my opinion, doesn't take any of that into consideration. If you're struggling with illness, if you're struggling with an injury, if you're struggling with mental health problems and you miss the cut, it's just cold, hard numbers in strokes gained, and you lose whatever strokes lost you've had. In a point system, you miss the cut, you get no points, but you're not penalised any more than anyone else who misses the cut. And I just tend to think that's a better way, in my opinion, to go.
What makes it better in comparison?
Well, for me, I think it's the fact that, the reality is not everybody is hitting every shot with the same intent. And strokes gained kind of assumes that everybody is. And I think that's a false narrative. There's players that are working on their games and trying to fix something, and they're not really playing the course. They're playing what's going on in their games. There's players like Brooks who might be playing a tour event, and they're working on things in readiness for the Masters or the Open Championship or whatever majors coming up. And if they're in contention, they'll want to win, but that's not their prime focus. It's not, not everybody is in that same space with how they approach every shot and every event. And I just think that's really tricky for shots gains to cover correctly. In fact, I don't think it can.
So it sounds like it leaves an opening that or a criteria that's not covered, or it's covered. It's something that's inefficiently covered. That it could
That's
be
what I think.
lot more efficient.
I just think a points-based system where if you make the cut, or depending on the size of the field in mind, not everybody that makes the cut gets points in mind. It depends on how strong the field is. Some of the lesser events, if you finish outside the top 40, you won't get points, mainly because the points are too small to matter once you get to that stage. But if you don't get points, it's not hurting you other than the fact that you're not gaining, if that makes sense. Whereas strokes gained, whatever's going on that's causing your poor results, that's hurting you in the rankings.
What have been the counter argument or the arguments back to you and your system from some of the let's say the traditionalists or the ones who adhere to the OWGR?
The biggest thing is, my system is seen as very LIV biased. There's more LIV players in my top 100, my top 150 than on the OWGR, clearly, and on data golf as well.
Mhm.
I think a lot of the difference in data golf is just the difference between the points-based system and a strokes gained. But I would argue that my system isn't LIV biased. My system is valuing strong performances on all tours, including the DP World Tour, the Asian Tour, the Japanese Tour, Sunshine Tour. Players that play well on all these tours are more highly elevated on my system than they are on the OWGR.
Yeah, I have posted a few times, and I don't remember if it was Brando Chambly's comment on X or whose it was, but my response has been, and I've caught flack for it, but I don't care. I think it's a common sense view. Of course, that's my view, so I think it's common sense. But when they're clamoring about getting LIV official world golf points, and I said, well, with all the numbers people, if you take a Mark Brody and his strokes gain, because that's what they're basing their system off of, I said, just because it's a 54-hole event, not a 72, there's got to be ways to calculate out the one less round. You can't tell me that just because someone's played 3 rounds instead of 4, that they don't get the same amount of points. Or if you want to deduct points for one less round, fine. But I said in today's world with the computers we have and the brain power and the people who are phenomenal with numbers and stats and everything else, you can't tell me that you can't make a modification that will allow Liv to get points. And obviously you have.
Yeah, I mean, the OWGR has recently, beginning of this year, announced that they've adjusted how they handle 54-hole events. In the past, it was the number of holes scheduled that determined the points value, as in whether you got full 100% weighting. If it got to 36, if it was a 72-hole event and it was curtailed to 54 holes, you still got 100% value. If it was curtailed to 36 holes, then you dropped to 75% value. At the beginning of that was always going to be an issue for Liv. I think in the Liv discussions with the OWGR, that reality that this change was coming was known, and that's why they've adjusted to 72 holes for 2026. Because as of the beginning of this year, the announcement came out that the OWGR is applying across all tours scheduled 72 holes or curtailed, it's the number of holes played that determine the points. 72 holes played is 100% value. 54 holes played is 75% value, whether it was scheduled for 72 or not. That makes a whole lot of sense to me.
Makes more sense.
It made no sense to me that the number of holes you have on the piece of paper is more important than the number of holes they play on the course. Now, I could debate that 54 holes is as hard to win in a different way than 72 holes. People can agree or disagree with that. You don't have time for a dodgy round. You can't make that up over 54 holes. But the flip side is that you have to play consistently well for an extra round over 72. So there's two sides to the coin, and I'm fine with the 54 holes being deemed a lesser value as long as it's applied consistently. The downside with applying consistently is it's going to kill some of the developmental tours even more than they already are, because this week, for example, the Big Easy Tour kicks off, and the winner was going to earn a massive 0.259 OWGR points, but because it's a 54-hole series, it's dropped to 0.20091 points. But I guess, losing 25% of bugger all is bugger all. So,
because I have a student and he's played that tour, and as a feeder tour to the South African tour, I don't even know what the name of it. I'll just my era South African tour, so I'll go with that
Sunshine Tour, they call it.
Sunshine Tour. So I can see where if the Sunshine Tour, and this is by no disrespect to the people of South Africa or the players on that tour, I would equate the Sunshine Tour to the Corn Ferry Tour here in the U.S., almost on par, the level of play. I could be wrong, and there are probably some players there that can play the PGA Tour, DP Tour. So, but just broadly speaking, if I were to compare across the board, or let's say the rankings, if I took your rankings, I'd say that if you went from top to bottom, you would have a fair number, or they would be somewhat close to one another. So what I'm getting at is, I think the Big Easy is a feeder tour to the Sunshine Tour, which would then feed to DP and maybe some to the PGA Tour. So I can see where they're not giving a feeder tour as many points. Makes sense, because you've got to earn your way to that nation's or that region of the world's bigger tour before you can start getting some points to get to the biggest tours on the planet. I personally don't have a problem with a small developmental tour, I'll call it. Again, no disrespect to them, just the language I use when I came up. As someone who played developmental tours, so in fact, the first mini tour I played on was called the DP Tour, the Developmental Players Tour. But I can see where I could tend to agree with giving a smaller tour like that, that's a feeder tour, to a bigger one, not getting that many world ranking points makes sense to me. You correct me if I'm wrong.
Look, I think there's certainly a case for that. I just personally feel that if you're playing professional golf on any tour in the world, you are a very, very good golfer. Mm-hmm. You may not be Scotty Scheffler or Xander Schauffele, Rory McIlroy level, but to even be making a career out of professional golf, you're a very, very good player. And I don't see how it hurts anybody on the big tours to, give a minimum of 1 or even 2 points for a win against a full.
I can see that.
on a
That makes sense.
full field event. Smaller field events on the developmental tours, on my system, 1 point's as much as you're going to get. But if it's a full field event on mine, you won't get less than 2 points for a win, because I just think winning means something more than what the OWGR numbers give it on some of those smaller tours now.
Yeah, and I think some of those smaller tours, there's only 12 to 15 events. So
Yeah,
if a guy or girl ran the entire table, they won every event, they're going to get 30 points.
They're not racing into the majors on their OWGR ranking, or even if they win everything. Yeah.
So I can see that perspective, and I have no argument with that whatsoever. That would be interesting. One of the players won 15 events in a row, and they got 30 total world golf ranking points.
Well, I can remember when the new system first started, and there was a player on a Pro India tour named Manu Gandas, and he'd won an event earlier in 2022 under the old system and received 5 WGR points for the win. Later that year, after the new system came in, he won 4 more events and didn't win 5 points in total. And I think that was a bit of a catalyst for me going, this just isn't, that's too big a deduction. And that's, I think that it was seeing that is when I first introduced a multiple win bonus into my system as an adjustment, which, by the end of 2023, the OWGR had introduced into theirs. I was only doing it on small points tours for mine, but they did it, OWGR did it across the board. So even the likes of Scotty and Rory, who get, 65, 70 points for a win in a big field event, they get another 4 bonus points for that now too. Where I just figure if you make the points big enough without, you shouldn't even need the bonus points. So my system doesn't have bonus points. I value the wins enough to not warrant doing that.
There you are. I got you. Do you ever see a system, because it's got to be always evolving, constantly changing, I would imagine. Is there ever going to be where a system's in place that it's, I won't say flawless, but let's say 99% of where it needs to be?
Look, I think technically everything is possible, but I think that is unrealistic unless you have nothing else to do but analyze all the data, look at the field setups, and you'd have to have people on the ground that you trust implicitly to give you that feedback as to just how tough it was playing. And if you could make all those adjustments into a strength of field, what your strength of field was at the beginning of the week, and then adjust it because of how the condition, like if it rains and it becomes soft, you take points off. If the wind blows really hard, greens firm up, do you add extra points on? If you could make those adjustments, you could get very close to 99% correct, but it would take a lot of people and a lot of work.
But might not be feasible.
Probably not.
I thought that Bob Herrig from Sports Illustrated, former sports, he's a reporter. Bob's been on the show, and Bob and I disagreed on this topic on X one time. We were having a back and forth discussion about it. And if Bob hears this, I hope he still likes me. We disagreed, but I just didn't. I hope it, the tight word never comes off the same as the discuss word, which is why I like systems like this where you can talk to somebody,
True.
Respectfully. But my whole thing was that Bob was trying to say, well, here's what the rules are. And, the guys that went to LIV, they knew what they were getting into, or they had an idea, or they were not told real information. I said, Bob, you and I both know that there's a lot of BS in that. Not saying that he was BS, but I said, you've got the board of the official world golf rankings is the PGA Tour, and everyone that kind of seems to be in line with one another that from the outside looking in seem to be anti-LIV. So you're not going to tell me, and many of the people out there who are unbiased, and I always consider myself a golf fan. I catch flack from people on social media. Oh, you're just living. You're anti-tour. I said, no, I'm not. And I can get into, we'll talk about, I've had Mark Lyon a couple of times. We've talked about why it was nice to see the PGA Tour of a competitor. But I said that you cannot tell me that there's not a way that all these very smart people with numbers, you being one, can't come up with a way to give LIV players points. Well, they knew they weren't going to get points to begin with. I said, that's not the point, Bob. You can't call it an official world golf ranking. And I think this was the common consensus from the golfing world across the globe, not just certain segments that had their biases. I said, you can't tell me that official world golf rankings is official, the first word in the title, if they're not including a John Rahm and a Brooks Koepka and a Cam Smith. It is not an official, and Bryson DeChambeau, he wins the U.S. Open. So it isn't official. Not if it's included. If it's eliminating golfers for whatever reason, then it's not official. And then, we had that back and forth and probably still disagree. And again, mine was not a pro live. It's a, hey, if there's a tour in, I don't know, pick a country. I don't know, any country that's going to play 54. If there's world class players playing on that tour, somehow that they're going to get points. They might be less points if they win or they place in that event, but still points nonetheless. You can't just shut them out completely and say that you're at an official ranking.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I personally think that the maths can be done, and people will argue whether it's done right or not. And some people certainly will argue with me about mine as to whether it's done right. But there's no question at all that live events, in my mind, should have been given points. I just think the sport itself, or the ranking body, has one job, and it's to rank, even its objective on its website list, to rank all the players in the leading golf tournaments played around the globe. And if they're not ranking live events, they're failing in that objective. And I think that's, for me, has been the disappointing aspect of the OWGR. And when, as you said, so many people in line with the PGA Tour, it's very easy to look at them and go, gee, there's a massive conflict of interest on that the controlling board of an organisation that has the power to accept tours without ticking all their criteria boxes, or reject a tour that might tick all of them if they, for whatever reason, don't want to approve it. And I just think, you've opened up a can of worms when you start going outside your criteria for other tours or other events, such as the Hero event. And the minute you do that, you lose a bit of credibility as far as being able to go, oh no, your tour can't get points because you don't meet our criteria. Well, you've already opened that Pandora's box. Hard to put the lid on now.
Yeah, very hypocritical, in my opinion, the opinion of many. If you read enough things, and the Hero is a prime example, that you're going to give was it 20-player field?
Yeah. Well, it was 16 at the start.
Yeah.
I think it got points originally when it was 18. The criteria was minimum small field cap was 30. And I'm thinking, when they told Tiger that it needed to be not just an invitational if he wanted OWGR points, how easy would it have been to say it needs to be on merit, not an invitational, and you need 30 players in the field as per the OWGR rules? Problem solved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely well, when they're damaging their own credibility is what they're doing. When you're going
I
to
agree.
knock one tour and then you're going to give favor to people who align with your way of thinking, it doesn't do the world of golf any good. People can see that. I mean, it reminds too many people of the political world, where people are saying one thing, as we have supposedly now in our country, that there's a mass amount of financial fraud that was discovered, or they're at least looking into it. And it
Yes.
just makes one side, or whoever is doing that deed incorrectly or wrongfully, completely loss of credibility and trust. And if you don't have trust in something, you're contributing to your own demise. And I think that is the biggest rift in golf. I thought what the PGA Tour did, and I always go back to this when I have this discussion with people on social media, which I try to stay away from as much as possible. But when the tour came out with that honor and integrity thing right from the beginning, we do things honor and integrity, and then they're doing all these backhand deals and trying to do deals behind closed doors, and they're giving points to limited fields. It's like, what happened to your motto, that your guiding principle?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of talk from PGA Tour and PGA fans about legacy and tradition. A lot of that legacy and tradition has been flipped and changed in the last couple of years. Doesn't really exist the same way that it did. I'll get roasted regularly for hating the PGA Tour, and I personally think that's a little bit unfair. I may not be a fan of how the PGA Tour has operated at various times in its life, the way it's used political power to stop things from happening that were just questioning or trying to validate the legality of certain things in their policy. But I mean, I love much of what goes on in the PGA Tour. I love a lot of the PGA Tour events. I may not be a big fan of really soft, green, vulnerable courses, but not all the PGA Tour courses are set up that way. And the events that don't have them, I love. Some of those iconic PGA Tour events are still my favourite events on the calendar outside the majors.
Yeah, when Mark Lai, I mentioned Mark earlier. Mark's been on a couple of times, and Mark's a little older than I am, and he had a much more successful career than I. I never got my PGA Tour card, but I can remember, and I brought this story up to him. In 2001 was the first year that I played professionally, and I missed it first stage of Q school. I was just it was your first year, you're so out of it, out of your element, learning to travel and all these other things. It's just overwhelming, and it got the better of me. But a dear friend of mine had missed from back then the Buy.com tour his card by like $1,100. So he was exempt to third stage, final stage of PGA Tour school. We went down to Bear Lakes in Palm Beach. And at that time of year and at that time was when a lot of the journeymen who had been on and off the tour, let's say they were on the tour for a number of years and that had some down years and they were off. But that was a time of year that they would go down to where you are, Australia and Southeast Asia, and they could play the Japanese tour. And if they were had enough of a reputation or name and a career, they were giving um, show up money, you know, 25,000, 50,000, depending on how well known they were. And almost every guy on the range that was warming up was bitching and moaning that the tour was denying all of their releases, even though they met the criteria to play the number of events they had. And Mark said it goes back further than that into the 80s when he had played really, and he had played in Australia. I think he came in second order of merit. Greg Norman beat him one year. Did he win Australian Open or PGA? He either won it or almost won it one year. But he wanted a release to go play in the Irish Open or something like that to prep for the British Open. And the tour said, "No, we're not going to give it to you." And he said, "Why?" They said, "We're just not going to do it." So from I'm not saying I'm an insider, a deep insider, but experiencing that, listening to that from the players who were getting treated improperly because there was nowhere to go for them because the tour had all the power. I tell some of these people, listen, that can't be true. I said, yeah, it's true. I was there. Talked to and the people who actually experienced it. I talked to them. They you can't do those sort of things. And that doesn't get out to the public. Now, I'm not bashing the PGA Tour 100%. I'm just trying to illustrate why some people, and I'm sure Mickelson had many more reasons to jump to LIV and be such a proponent of it. He has come out on X and said a number of things like, why don't they do this? Why don't they talk about this? But I think that people, the general public, knowing more of the reasons behind these things, why these players would risk what they did, and of course they got compensated for it very handsomely. Those are things that I think people understand. And the other one is, and not for me to ramble on, I'd like get your opinion because you're down under. The golfing world had somewhat alienated places like Australia and South Africa and these long time established places that were contributed quite a bit to the golfing world in general. Liv has kind of picked up that that torch and said, "Hey, we're going to go to these places that have more or less been alienated." There's probably reasons you might have some reasons living down there why you were told or why you understand why some of the PGA Tour players don't come down there anymore, or at least as frequent as they used to. But I'll shut up now and get out of the way and let you talk because you're the guest and why people are here.
Well, I think a lot of the reason comes down to the dollars. If you go back into the 80s, through the 90s, and till the start of the 2000s, while there was good money to be made as an elite player on the PGA Tour, players for decades, going back to Arnold and Jack in his earliest career, Gary Player, these guys travelled all over the world for appearance fees. Well, back in Arnie's day, originally it was for Dunlop sponsorship endorsement money. He'd be paid, I think, there was, evidence of $30,000 or $35,000 to come and play in the Australian Open or to go and play in the Open Championship by his equipment sponsor. That morphed into appearance fees, and those players could get a handy, bonus to come and play in some of these events. And it's not too bad coming and playing, the Sound Belt in Australia or some of the iconic places in, courses in South Africa and places like that, for appearance fee. So, some of the guaranteed money that issue that people have with LIV kind of ignores the fact that outside of the PGA Tour, guaranteed money has always been a part of golf ever since golf was, became professional. And it changed really when Tiger arrived. Tiger hit the world scene. in such a fashion, unlike anything we've seen before, and at a time where digital technology was starting, all this stuff, perfect storm, and the corporate sponsorship dollar that followed Tiger to the PGA Tour basically meant that if you were on the PGA Tour and playing well, you did not need to travel anywhere to be more than lucratively remunerated. So a lot of the players, I think David Duval, was very open in his tenure as world number one, even about, I have no interest in coming and playing in the Australian Open, basically for the prize money. Why would I travel that far, that distance for that? He didn't need to. Whereas, previous generations like Jack Arney and Gary, that's how they bumped up their earnings for the year. They were comfortable, but they weren't wealthy unless they went and played all over the place. Interesting side note, I grew up in a small country town about 2.5 hours away from the capital city. And when I started playing golf as a 14-year-old, Gary Player held the course record there. A little country town called Kingaroy, and one of the Grand Slam champions was the course record holder. That was back in 1980 when I started playing. And I'm
That's very
thinking,
cool.
how many piddly-ass town course records has Tiger got? I'm thinking not many.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think as you look at as the game has changed, because like I said, 2001 was when a lot of these journeyman players were still going, because even to go further than that, a lot of those guys, because there weren't as many mini tours in the States back then. Before the Hogan Tour, a lot of those players would play in Japan.
Yes,
I don't know how many of them came down to Australia, but I had
quite a few
friends, yeah, a few friends of mine that played in Japan and the Asian Tour, and then would run down if they got invited or somehow got into a tournament in Australia. But that era, and I would, they're in their probably late 50s, early 60s now. That era, as you said, Tiger changed it to where anybody who played that was beginning their career mid to late 90s and after, the money's so big they don't have to fly
yeah,
that far. But and I will say that they do still do it for money, because they still fly to Dubai and Emirates, a
true.
fair amount of them, to go play. So it's not just they won't do it for the money, they'll do it for bigger money.
Bigger money, yeah. Well, I mean, Rory played in India and he came down and played the Australian Open, and he's coming back again next year for the Aussie Open.
Mhm.
And, the handsome remuneration in regards of appearance fee. There's some debate, on social media as to just what the figure is. But let's say he's done quite well out of those couple of trips, and he'll do quite well out of the Australian trip next year. So the big money still attracts players, even the very wealthy players,
Mhm.
if they don't mind international travel. And it seems that a lot of the PGA Tour players, the American players, and also those who've grown up through the US college system, a lot of them are just really happy traveling and playing domestically in the US, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think what really doubled down and hurt the Australian Tour was the wraparound season, when points pressure on the PGA Tour kept players playing in the US longer, and then they needed a break, so they were less likely to come back and play a couple of our events down here in our summer. It just made that a bit trickier for them, because they felt that put them behind the field on the standings for next year. So that the big money plus the wraparound season was probably the combination of things that did a lot of damage. If you look at the tour here and the tour in South Africa, these are long. They've been around for a long time with a rich history, and what they were to where they have been in the last few years has been quite tragic, but guaranteed money, which brought them all along, now in the form of a live sign-on bonus, has restored some interest. I think it's just acknowledgement of that's how you get top players to play. You have to pay them big money, whether it's event by event in appearance fees, or whether it's a multi-year contract as LIV do it, but you'll get them in a plane traveling out of the US and the UK to faraway places if the money's right.
Yeah, I always it is generational. I had always enjoyed watching the Australian Open, Australian PGA, because as we were transitioning into winter, if I'm not mistaken, you guys are transitioning to summer, and it was fun to watch that. I can see, to your point, where younger players who grew up in the U.S., AJGA, then college, and if they can play here, whether it's Corn Ferry, and even if you're doing fairly decent on Corn Ferry nowadays, you can there's enough money you can make a living out there. And then you get to the big tour, and obviously there's riches to be had, but to do that without having to travel, because to when I went to South Africa, I mean, that's a 5, 6, 7 day recovery, where you got to get back on track. And if you're looking at, okay, I've got to to go to Australia, now you're 13-hour difference, roughly 12, 13, 14, depending where you are in the country, there and here, you're looking at a week to two that you got to be there ahead of time so that you're ready to go and you're not jet lagged and sleep deprived and all those things. And then you're there for the week, and then you got to come home and you need 2 weeks to recover. That's a 5 week process. I guess I can, and where things are getting so much harder over in the U.S. tour, as far as they're taking less, so you got to be on your game more often, et cetera, et cetera. It's a changing dynamic. Some people who I don't agree with that said, well, they did this on purpose. They just want the U.S. tour to be the end all tour. I'm like, do you really think that the PGA Tour tried to squeeze out the Australian tour? No, I don't. I don't think that. I don't think you do either, or anyone that is sensible. I just think it's a changing dynamic in the world that we live in, and things change much faster now than they did 20 years ago. And it's the result of that change that is making it more difficult for more players to go that far and play.
Agreed. I don't think there was ever intent from the PGA Tour to harm the Australasian Tour or the Sunshine Tour. I just think it was one of those unfortunate consequences for how things, expanded so quickly in the
Mhm.
Tiger era in the US. Things happened so quickly. They were working so hard to try and make that happen and make that work. And, the ramifications elsewhere, which wasn't their intent, just happened to be that it significantly weakened fields in other tours. And I tend to think that in hindsight, if the PGA Tour had have known that this was going to be the outcome, if they had it all over again, they would have maybe a more global vision for how to handle that boom period.
Mhm.
And, like the DP World Tour, for example, has done a fantastic job of taking their tour all over the world with very much a global vision. What they don't have outside of a handful of Rolex Series events is the star player power to draw the masses. And you don't need a whole lot of stars. We saw down here that, the Australian Open was insane from
Yeah,
a crowd.
I watched some
From a
on TV. It was
crowd.
unbelievable.
It was, but between you know, the Ripper guys coming back from Live, Rory coming out, some of the other, DP World Tour players coming. That's all it takes for a golf-starved nation like Australia to turn up and make it something special. I mean, Live Adelaide is just a crazy event. It is the highlight of the sporting calendar for a lot of golf fans, and it's just there's a lot of partying to it, but in amongst all that, there's some pretty damn good golf as well. And I'm really glad that at least this year, and I'm not a betting man, but I would put money on next year, the Australian Open with Rory back again. We'll have two really, really quality events that are well supported by fans on the ground here in Australia, which I think is great for our game here.
It was great to see that. It was like a revival of the Australian Open
Yeah.
to see it so big like it used to be. I mean, it was such a marquee event. Watching it back in the '90s late night TV for us. We get you back when the Masters on. You guys got to be up half the night to watch that. That one, another one I used to watch in the middle of the night was the Sun City $1 Million Challenge, the Ned Bank, going way back into the
Yeah,
early to
yeah.
mid '90s.
Yeah, I remember
The
that.
winner got $1 million, and that was a lot of money.
It was back then.
30 some years ago, 30 plus years ago, and it was so cool to see. There
I
were
I
some funny stories.
I
Go ahead.
I think that Sun City $1 million event was actually the first real bone of contention between Greg Norman and the PGA Tour, because after Norman played in it once, he was summoned to talk to the tour CEO at the time, and they talked about their displeasure with him going and playing over there because of the apartheid regime and how it wasn't on brand for the PGA Tour, and I don't know how politely, but requested that he didn't play again. And I think Greg, with his "we're independent contractors and we choose where we play" mindset, didn't take too kindly to the hint or the instruction or the direction. And I think there's a bit of a sticking point there that never ever went away and probably got maximised over other things through the years.
How is Greg Norman since the live and since his career? How is he viewed in Australia? Is he still the hero, the marquee golfer that people look at? Like I know in the U.S. It is somewhat, I think, stained his reputation as far. I would say that the majority, just given maybe 60% don't appreciate him and 40% do, where maybe years ago that would have been flipped, or more towards 70% really looked at him favorably. Is that similar in Australia, or is his home nation stood behind him through all this?
I wouldn't say that the whole nation has stood behind Greg through this, but the percentage would be far higher. That Greg is still valued and appreciated, not just for his playing career and what he did in returning to Australia every year to basically be the face of our Australian golf summer for so long, but also bringing his US PGA Tour friends down with him when he came. We got some very good players from the US playing because of a personal invite or a private jet flight with Greg down here. But I think there's, the majority of golf fans in Australia value what Greg has done with LIV in bringing elite golf back to the country. There are some that are strongly linked to the establishment, some former players. Now, I don't know Greg personally. I've heard lots of talk that he was on tour, he was a polarizing character, and players speaking out how they didn't particularly like him then. Well, they're not liking him anymore now. But personalities are personalities, and we don't get along with everybody. But I think the overwhelming majority of golf fans in Australia, they might not think the sun shines out his butt, but they're appreciative and they value what Greg Norman has done, both as an international player, world number one, two-time major winner, and as the LIV CEO, bringing elite golf back to the country.
Yeah, I would that would be my assumption, and then you confirmed it. Just again from the 10,000-foot view, it would be hard for me if I was an Australian to not appreciate what he has done for the golfing world in your country, in your part of the world.
Yeah, I'm a little bit biased. I mean, I was a Greg Norman fan when I was younger. He wasn't my favourite player. My favourite player when I first started the game was Calvin Peete and Tom Watson were my two favourite players. Back in the day, we had two TV channels, and only the Australian golf was on either of them, except for the majors were on in the middle of the night. So I used to save up my pocket money, or when I started a part-time job, and I'd buy Golf Digest magazine once a month, and that would keep me up to speed with all the stuff that was happening in the US and the UK. And I was getting my golf feed through reading articles and looking at tournament results in the back of the magazine. And from there, reading articles, I just was fascinated by Calvin Peete, how straight he hit the ball, and given the stuff that he experienced in his early childhood, including his arm. And Tom Watson was just, I started looking at golf not long after Turnberry, that late 70s kind of, and he was just coming on and starting to take over. He'd been like, with Johnny Miller, maybe the heir apparent to Jack Nicklaus's throne. And he kind of, in that period, he kind of jumped over Johnny Miller. And so he was a bit wavered off the tee, which was an interesting contradiction to Calvin Peete. If he had a weakness, that was probably it. But and then Seve, Ballesteros, and Greg were the other two.
Yeah.
So
they really.
In 1981, for 12, 18 months, I could not get enough of watching or reading about Bill Rogers. He won the Open Championship. He came down here, won the Australian Open, and watching him play with a three-quarter backswing. Again, straight driver, didn't hit it long, and just putted the eyes out of it. So, yeah, that's where I started from a fandom point of view.
Very cool. That is a walk down memory lane. Is some of the names that I have not heard in quite some time. Speaking of names, of hearing names, Brooks Koepka is the big discussion in the golfing world now. His move from LIV Golf back to the PGA Tour. I was somewhat aware that this was coming through. I don't want to say who. I had some people who were very, very close to Brooks that I talked to that I know going back to November, and said that he's really not happy that he might be going back to the tour. They were in discussions, I guess, back then. But I'm on the fence, and I'd like to get your opinion on this. And I'm on the fence about will will he make a big difference on the PGA Tour, or is he just going to kind of blend in again? You know, because he had his injury with the knee. I'm sure it's back fine now. You know, obviously played very well on LIV, but um, and I think his dip in the last year was he had some issues at home, not marital issues. I think there was just family things that were preoccupying his attention. What do you think is going to happen with him at PGA Tour? Do you think he's going to fall right back into being a superstar? Is he going to have to maybe go through a year of sorting it out, and how relationships are reestablished with some of the people who might uh, not appreciate him coming back, or being allowed to come back, or allowed to come back so quickly, etc. You've got to have you do have an opinion. I've seen some of your posts, but I'd
Yeah,
like to pick your brain more here on the show.
sure. Okay, Brooks on the PGA Tour. I think a lot will be determined by how he plays. If Brooks plays as Brooks can at his best, if he's happy, if things are okay at home, and I'm expecting that not having to do all the international travel and being more available to be, the best husband and dad that he can be, without, all over the world type stuff.
Hmm.
And he plays his best, he will be welcomed back by even those who may not have wanted him to be welcomed back. They'll change their tune pretty quickly. I think if he struggles, and if 2026 PGA Brooks is 2025 LIV Brooks performance wise, the PGA Tour, that it'll be harder for him to get the support and the acceptance that he's hoping for. Doesn't mean it won't happen, but two things. I think we'll see Alpha Brooks sooner rather than later.
Hmm.
I think if he's happier on the PGA Tour, and I think that'll show in his on course performances. I'm expecting Brooks will play pretty well, certainly in the back half of the season. I'm really pleased that, for whatever reason, it might have been out of the goodness of Liv's heart. It might have been the fact that changing from 54 holes to 72 holes is something contractually that Brooks was never signed for, and that might have been an escape clause for him. But either way, I'm really happy that Liv has let him go with an acknowledgement of his skills, and in a mutually agreeable tone. I think that was mature, grown up, and I think that's a really good place for Liv to leave the relationship. I think it's very interesting, the PGA Tour's new program that was recently released.
Interesting is a good word.
And particularly some of the criteria. Personally, I think there's two other players that they want, but they'll take Cam Smith as well if it happens. But I don't think anyone on the PGA Tour could really care less whether Cam took it up or not. But John Rahm and Bryson, they would be big ducks to get back on your pond.
Tell everybody that might not be aware, because it's only come out in, I think, the last day or two, that the criteria that allowed him to come back,
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
that some might not understand.
Yeah. The PGA Tour returning members policy has been announced. And the criteria is that if you are an elite player with a major win or a players' championship win since 2022, you can come back immediately to the PGA Tour without any time suspension. There is a financial penalty of a donation to charity. In Brooks' case, it was $5 million. And there is a 5-year period where you can't accrue any of the PGA Tour player equity program money. You'll be earning money for the tour and therefore the other tour players while you play, but you can't access any of that for 5 years. So effectively, it opens up the door. There's a 3-week window for that to take place that closes, I think it's February 2nd. It's been reported as a one-time only, no guarantee the window will open again, but we will see about that. From what I've read online this morning, there's reports from people close to either journos at the LIV Week or close to the camps that have confirmed that Bryson's not taking it up, John Rahm's not taking it up, and Cam Smith is very happy with the decision he made to move to LIV and is no intent to change that. But it was very interesting to see what that program looked like when it was announced.
Yeah.
Very, very, very different, for example, to the recent suspension for 12 months of Pat Perez, not because he's played recently in a LIV event, but because he was a commentator on LIV events, and he's got a 12-month suspension to serve for that. So obviously this is not a part of Brian Rolap's parity pillar. This is star players get different treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other one that I was Michaelides, I've had on the show, and he is a partner in the open forum at the PGA show. They'll have arguably 400 plus coaches and people in that space, because they do the technology training and coaching seminars the Tuesday night of the PGA show. To me, it's the best event at the PGA show. For $100, it starts at about 6 o'clock. Sometimes it goes till midnight, 1 in the morning. And just people debating, arguing, challenging, discussing, etc. It's a great event. But anyway, Michaelides is one of the co-founders and people involved, and he shares opinion like we do. It's not so much pro live as it's, hey, there needs to be some competition in the golfing world, so that the PGA Tour just doesn't say, here's what we're doing, you have to do it or else get out. He had a post this morning, and I commented, I said, it's very interesting that Brooks gets to go back to the PGA Tour under this sort of criteria. Wesley Bryant played in a 9-hole YouTube match and he's still banned. And I said, where is the honor and integrity in this decision? On the facade, it makes no sense. I'm sure that somebody will argue to the contrary, that is a very pro PGA person. But I mean, Wesley Bryant, I know his dad against him. He's a couple hours up the road. Very good guy, great family. And you're playing a 9-hole match on YouTube. And I'm sure somebody said, well, it violated the PGA Tour media rights, et cetera. It says, like, come on, it's 9 holes on YouTube and you're going to ban him. He's a PGA Tour winner. He's not a major winner, but he's a winner. I don't envy those the brass at the PGA Tour headquarters that has to navigate these uncharted waters on how to bring some of these players back, yet still protect the brand of the PGA Tour. It cannot be easy.
I think there'll be some upset loyal PGA Tour players that
very much so.
Brooks is coming back so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
On a side note, you mentioned Wesley Bryant. One of the funniest things I've seen in the last couple of days on Twitter, Wesley put a post up with his alternative player returning member policy program.
I didn't see it. I got to hear what this one was.
And it was an elite player having won a major or a Players' Championship since 2022 was Category 1. Category 2, a player who played in a 9-hole scramble. The $5 million charity bonus is only applied to Category 1 players.
I think Brooks has that $5 million covered, and I can't remember how much he got from LIV, but I don't think he's too much worried about not being able to partake in the equity portion for, what'd you say, 5 years, especially when he can be a couple hours from home.
Yeah,
if needed at the drop of a hat.
And look, as Brooks didn't play anything like the real Brooks Koepka last year, but he still won or earned $4.3 million in LIV prize money. So he's not going to struggle with that $5 million donation at all.
The original perspective, I think, for most people is, wow, that this is really a gut shot to LIV. At first, I would probably have been guilty of that perspective. And then I got to thinking about it for a minute, and I said, well, if LIV his focus is on developing world golf, again, as we go back to places like Australia and South Africa and around the world. And I think for them, and this is just pure speculation, I have no idea if this is right or wrong, or if this is their thinking. Just the way that, as you said, they were very professional in wishing Brooks the best. Go back to PGA Tour, all the best to you. Thank you for participating, etc. And they probably know some of the story, he needed for his family. But it's like, they serve the purpose for each other. You know, at the time Brooks signed, I think it was on full swing. He said, you know, his knee was in trouble. He didn't know what his career was going to hold for him. Now he can go back. He's physically healthy again. But they serve the purpose for each other. He helped give Liv credibility. Liv gave him a place that was guaranteed. Now he can go back, and I don't think that it's going to be as big of a gut punch as many are making it out to be, at least in the bigger picture. Maybe for the short term, or that you get other guys starting to defect, it might be different. But I don't. First, I did, and now I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. I think it'd be good. Might not be good to lose a guy like Brooks, but it's good for Brooks to go back to the tour. It's good for Liv to say, "Hey, we're going to continue with what we're doing, and we've got our plan. We'd love to have you, but we don't have to have you."
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's important for Liv, given that it was birthed very much from Greg Norman's belief of players having free agency to choose where they want to be and where they want to play. I think Liv has to handle someone going back to the PGA Tour the way they did. That's free agency at work for whatever reason it might be. You know, even if that reason is the Liv, it's just not what I want. It wasn't what I thought it would be, and I've had enough. I want to go back. Free agency says, well, if that's in our DNA, off you go. Thank you for what you've contributed. All the best on the
Yes.
PGA Tour.
If you're going to found yourself and that's going to be your charter, then you better damn well adhere to it, which is, again, if we go back to the PGA Tour's loss of credibility, it's like they come out honor and integrity and they're doing backdoor deals. I think that was what really irritated Rory and a lot of players that were not very happy with that. And rightfully so.
Well, I tend to think that I'll get in trouble a lot because I'll argue that, strangely enough, that, you know, it was only the money. Players only went for the money and nothing else. And like, I'll admit, for most of the players that signed the bonuses, the money was a huge factor. For some who didn't get bonuses, like Richard Bland, the guaranteed prize purse money was a big factor. But for the wealthy players like your DJs and your Brooks, your Brysons, your John Rahms, the money alone can't be the only reason. Even a truckload of money can't be the only reason. And for John Rahm, you know, no one will convince me otherwise that, you know, his change of tune from October 22 to late 2023, where I don't need the money, I've got more than enough money now I'm signing with Liv. It wasn't just because they upped the price. The other big thing that happened was on June 6th that year in 2023, John Rahm, like the rest of the golfing world, found out that in secret meetings under the cover of darkness, the PGA Tour boss had been organising and talking about a deal with the same Saudi fund that he'd been preaching, don't take the dirty money, don't take the dirty money. And I think in John Rahm's mind, he'd gone, well, if it's good enough for Jay Monahan to take the Saudi money, it's good enough for me. And I think that other changed factor was also a part, maybe not as big as the money, but it's certainly a part in his decision to take the Saudi bag.
He did not like the hypocrisy at all. And I don't think that Bryson's coming back, because I think that one of the things that Bryson really enjoys doing is his YouTube channel. And for him to come back to the PGA Tour, he would have to shut that down. And I don't see the tour brass making an exception for him, because that's a media rights issue, and that goes against the entire tours where they get all their money from the media rights. So I think he might be in a quandary. He might want to come back. I don't know this. I'm just speculating or throwing this out there as a hypothesis. Even if he wanted to come back, I think the thing that he enjoys most is having the creative control of what he does outside of him playing in golf tournaments. And with his exemptions and his where he is with his game and his life and his experience and his skill and talent, I think that he'll play well enough in the majors that he can come back to those events when he wants to, and he plays his other events, and then he goes home and he does his YouTube stuff and enjoys life. His Break 50 series?
Yeah.
I mean, he's got millions of views.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see someone like him who, when he was on the tour, even when he was playing well before he went to LIV, he didn't look like he was the most comfortable person in the world. And he really looks like he's enjoying life now, generally speaking. And it's nice to see for somebody, whether you're a fan of his or not.
Yeah, agreed. I think Bryson looks like now he's being himself. And I think previously on the tour, he probably struggled to really be himself. It was very interesting. There was a recent interview that Bryson did with Tom from Flushing at Golf and talked about, the contract negotiations, and probably won't have, his contract extension sorted by the start of the season like, they originally hoped. Got some
Yes.
stuff to work out. We need to make sure that it's the right deal for both parties. He did say that this is where I want to be. And he's obviously he's honouring his the 2026 year in his contract. But when he said this is where I want to be, but if it doesn't work out for both parties, I'd be happy just doing my YouTube stuff. And I thought, he didn't say I'd be happy to go back to the PGA Tour. So like I think in his mind, that's a higher priority, as you've said, than playing PGA Tour. And if the PGA Tour means he can't do that, I think it's highly unlikely that he'd make that choice. He might not play LIV, but he won't go. I don't think he'd go back there either.
No, and in talking to people, that I have some friends that are still associated with the tour for the manufacturers and things like that, and I don't think he plays. I mean, he practices and goes to the range and enjoys doing that, but I don't think he plays golf at all. He tinkers. That's just his mindset, but I don't think he plays golf. I think he, as you said, he enjoys life, and he has the financial freedom to do that largely because of LIV. I mean, he did very, very well on the PGA Tour, of course.
Yes.
But LIV has put him in a new category where he can do whatever he wants the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And more power to him. He earned it.
Indeed. That's meritocracy at work, isn't it?
Yeah. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's an interesting dynamic. 2026 will be a very interesting year.
I think so.
To see how things play out.
On all the tours, I think. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens on LIV. There's news of some more signings and some team rebrands coming through today. I think there's only one spot still to be filled on Phil Mickelson's High Flyers. The rest of the roster is done. I think the PGA Tour will be really interesting. I mean, there's so much happening there, and with Brian Rollup now in charge and talking about, scarcity and, a lot of conjecture over for just what sort of scarcity he's talking about. But, the simple thing of, taking 25 full tour cards out of the equation certainly is a part of that. So the PGA Tour schedule going forward will be very interesting. And I think it also leaves the DP World Tour in an interesting place. The fall season they had was very successful, going to places like South Africa, and Australia, as well as their Middle Eastern, trek towards the end of the end of their 2025 season. So I think those three main tours, and I guess if I throw the Asian Tour in there as well, that's going to be some interesting stuff happening there. Like that recent LIV promotion event, not only gave 3 LIV spots, but the rest of the top 10 have exemption into all 10 international series events on the Asian Tour. So that becomes a bit of a draw card for that event moving forward. So there's things happening in the world of golf, and golf is good. More golf is better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the LIV dynamic to me is interesting. I thought it was, well, but whether someone liked them or not, I say you have to give credit from them to go from just talking about it to to putting it together and actually accomplishing what they did in the first year was absolutely phenomenal. It will go down in the Harvard Business School studies for many, many years to come to ramp up that quickly and go through a full year and get to the level they did. To me, what they're going to do going forward is interesting. I think it's going to be harder for them to get the big names on the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour is trying to lock things down with the equity and everything that they're offering. Myself, I see them maybe looking at the DP Tour and forming some sort of relationship with them, because the DP Tour is more of a world tour. As you said, that they've had success with traveling some more. And I think that's where LIV's focus is, to go around the world more so and grow golf again, or get it to places that are starved, like Australia has been for so long. So I in the future see maybe a relationship developing somehow, some way between the DP Tour and the LIV Tour, more so than the LIV seeing who they can get from the PGA Tour, fairly big names, let's say up to big names, to come play there. I think that did its job. The other thing I think, just to throw out there for you, is you don't hear really anything about DJ Dustin Johnson. That there's been almost no talk of anything, contract negotiations or staying or leaving or what he's doing, which is interesting.
It's been confirmed that DJ has extended his contract with LIV. Sergio's signed a 3-year extension. Westwood and
Good.
Poulter have had their contracts extended. DJ's extension, the information didn't have a time frame. So I don't know whether it's a single year, 2 year, 3 years, but he's renewed with that. There's an article came out where he was talking, I think again, it might have been with Flushing at Golf, how 2025 was really tough for him. He ended his relationship with TaylorMade in 2025. He's been playing their gear since 2000. Clubs were fine, except he couldn't get settled with the driver and struggled with the driver, had very little trust in the driver. And as he said, that has been such a strength for his game over his entire career. He's had to work very hard, and it was coming into a good place towards the end of the 2025 season. So it'll interesting to see. The photo in the article actually wasn't. It was from this LIV week in the Four Aces new Under Armour apparel. So apparently, new deal with Under Armour for their clothing.
I did see that one where they were all, it was in all blue.
Yeah, and he looks a little trimmer than he might have in 2025. If he's got that driver sorted, DJ, will threaten podiums again, I'm sure.
My theory on DJ is, and this will go back as we were talking earlier to maybe a bygone era where you remember when players would when golf wasn't, people weren't playing it when they were getting out of the crib. They weren't picking it up till maybe early teens or that era, and then they would advance and get in a career and so on. But they wouldn't hit their peak till their mid-30s, and then they would usually have kids, and then they would ride a couple years of being at their peak, and then their kids would get of age that they didn't want dad to go back on the road anymore. And I could have just imagined the emotional tug of war that would go on in those players' mind. Nick Price comes to mind. He was up there for a while, and his kids got of age, and and DJ's boys, if I'm not mistaken, are probably around 10 years old or so, and they're to that age where they want to play sports with dad. Obviously, he was a phenomenal. He's from a few hours up the road here from where I live. He was a phenomenal athlete. I'm sure his kids are great athletes. His father-in-law, obviously, who he is one of the best hockey players ever. And I'm sure his boys are great athletes, and they're going to want to play sports with dad. So I could see where it comes down to, well, do I go practice for a few hours or do I go play catch with the boys? I mean, when you've got 120 million from LIV and you had, let's say 50, 60 million he made on the PGA Tour, when you've got hundreds of $1,000,000 and your kids are asking you to play catch, you're not going to go to work. I don't care who you are.
No.
Why? What's the point?
That's right. And the other thing is to be the very best golfer that you can be at the elite level, you have to be so focused, so driven. And there's times and seasons in life where life just demands your focus and your drive to be elsewhere. And as you said, boys of that age, they want dad not just there, but they want dad to be available. And they want him available for what they want to do with him. And that changes things. Players like Cam Smith, his form's dropped off in the last 18 months or so, but in that time he's been engaged, and a month later he got married, and a year later he's had his first child. He's now a dad, not getting any sleep, so that probably impacts him on a golf course too. So there's seasons. Very few golfers can be so compartmentalized that they put everything in a box and only open the golf box when they need to only open the golf box. Jack was very successful in doing it amidst all the other family stuff that he had to do.
Mm-hmm.
Tiger was very successful doing it and managing in very different ways. But the norm for elite golfers is that other stuff of life impacts their game. Whether a short time, for some it's for longer, and for some it's for good.
Yeah, life, it doesn't just end at the golf course.
No.
If they do and things go sideways with the golf, then they're really in a bad place. I'm not saying you have to have balance, but you have to have more than one bucket.
Yeah.
I made that mistake early in my life where golf was everything, and when it wasn't there, it wasn't good.
Yeah, no.
What would you change about the golf ecosystem if somebody gave you the keys of the kingdom for a day? What would, and they say you can do anything, what would you change?
If I could, I would turn back time to early 2022. I would organise the meeting between the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and LIV Golf, and I would not leave that room with people until it was agreed that LIV would be included in the golf landscape, effectively replacing the defunct World Golf Series events that never made any money. Doesn't matter. PIF has all the money that we need. And I would have maybe 8 of those events, except they wouldn't be as US centric. They would be played in those rich history pockets of golf around the world. An event in each of those, it would be quite easy. The other thing I would do is through that 3-way collaboration and also in partnership with the Asian Tour, I would elevate national opens to be above tour events, just under the majors from a value, a prestige point of view. And I would be doing that via prize money. And then hopefully the prize money would attract players. So therefore your ranking points bump them up as well. So if that was a perfect world and I was king, that would be my mandate.
Well, everything would run smooth if that was the case.
Of course. It sounds so simple, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You got to wrap up here. Did you have time for emergency 9? Just some fun 9 questions to wrap up the show, and
why
then,
not?
then we'll let you run for the day. Okay. I tell everybody the first and the last one have been, every time I've done this, the first and the last are the same, and the 7 in between we kind of change in and out. But it's a lot of fun to finish the shows. You're playing golf and a member guest or you're a fun event there in your area, and they're going to get some music going to get everybody excited as you tee off. What song are you going to have them play?
I'm a big Knights of Sidonia by Muse fan.
Knights of Sidonia. And who is the band?
Muse.
All right, perfect. I don't know that one, but I'll look it up. I'm sure it's probably a pretty cool song.
Try and find the live at Wembley version. It's the best.
All right. What was that wasn't during that? What was that in the 80s? Was that at Wembley?
That Live Aid.
The Live
Yeah,
Aid.
it was at that stadium. Yeah.
Very cool. Hollywood calls you. They say, John, we followed your career. We're really impressed by it. And we're going to make a movie about it. And we're going to let you choose the actor that plays you in that role. Who are you going to have him pick?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Rob Schneider.
I just watched him on a podcast this morning. He's great, man. That guy cracks me up every time I hear him. He's always got something crazy to say. Hot dog at the turn. What are you putting on your hot dog?
Only tomato sauce.
I knew it would be something very simple.
Yeah.
Not numbers guy. Numbers guys usually keep it simple.
I know what I like and I like what I know.
This one's always interesting. The most used app on your phone.
It would be Twitter.
I was wondering if that was going to be it. Like I said, it's always entertaining reading some of your posts, and it's always interesting reading some of the other ones. But I was wondering if that was going to be your go-to. This is a new one, and this relates to guys that would be around our age. If you could go have one day where you could wake up as a 20-year-old again, what is one thing that you're going to do that day?
I'd be hopping in my 2-door Monaro with the 350 Chev, and I would be going as fast as that baby could go just one more time for nostalgia's sake.
Very good. Yeah, you're not really afraid of anything when you're 20 years old, I don't think.
No.
What book would be on your nightstand? Always curious to hear what guests are reading.
It's Andrew Cotter's Golf at War, or the War for Golf, or whatever, about the PGA Tour, LIV, the early history leading up to that at the moment.
I might have to get that one. Sounds very interesting. Sure, it has some good insights that not the masses aren't aware of.
He's a commentator, so he's got access to particularly DP World Tour events and some PGA Tour events and majors. So talking to people there, yeah.
Very cool. I'll check that one out. Who would be Mount Rushmore in the U.S. has 4 of our founding fathers or presidents on there. Who would be on your Mount Rushmore of golfers?
Jack, Tiger, Gary, Ben Hogan.
I don't think many are going to argue with that one. But it's always interesting to see some of the ones that shuffle in and out of there.
Well, Gary won't. I know he's on his.
Favorite golf course that you've played?
Raw Pines down the Gold Coast here. Used to host the Australian Ladies Masters.
I'm sure it's old school golf course.
Yeah, a resort course, and we played it on a corporate day the week after the tournament. So it was still set up in tournament mode, and they were still getting some of the names down off the temporary leaderboards around the course. So it was interesting playing a course so close to the event, still in an event setup. Admittedly, it was a ladies' event, so that probably helped. me
Yeah,
a
very
little bit.
cool.
Wasn't quite as tough as the men's event would be set up, but it was good.
Yes, that would be a lot of fun. And then the last one, in your opinion, what golfer is the greatest of all time? Who's the GOAT?
Jack by so far, it's not even funny. I think
That question is very much age demographic
yeah,
related,
yeah.
as you can imagine.
His top threes in majors separate him from everybody. Yeah, you know, over here we've the greatest cricketer in Australia is Don Bradman. His batting average was light years ahead of everybody else, and Jack's performance in majors is almost as him first, daylight second kind of thing. So
John, if people want to follow you, social media handles, best places to reach out.
yeah. Conrad Golf Ranking on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook. Yeah, I'm
Perfect.
more active on Twitter.
Absolutely. I'll have links to all those in your website. People can reach out to you, ask you questions, pick your brain. Hopefully that the powers to be will bring you into the room when they're looking, when they finally figure out what they're going to do with this ranking systems around the globe. I think that they would be remiss if they didn't. Again, following your information, it 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 takes into account some things that they don't seem to be taking into account. And I wish they would reach out to someone like you instead of just doing the same old or going back to maybe things that are more convenient.
I'd be happy to be a part of it if that was the case.
Well, if that happens, you gotta let us know. We
I
gotta bring you
certainly
back
would.
on and discuss that. It's been awesome. Hang out just for a minute. Everybody, thanks for joining again. God bless, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.